The title of this lecture is, What is History? In this lecture, we will explore the nature of historiography, that is, the craft of writing history. We will do this by looking at what motivated the writing of history in successive historical epochs and cultures. Some of the questions we will ask include, first, broadly speaking, what did the history writers of a given epoch investigate? Second, specifically, what was the focus of their inquiry? And finally, did they find any meaning in history, and if so, what was that meaning? We begin with the Greeks. Our very word history is derived from the Greek word historia, meaning inquiry or investigation. The modern term historiography refers to the craft of writing history. What did Greek historiography investigate? Before we answer this question, we need to understand the metaphysical presuppositions shared by most Greek historians. The Greeks had no concept of creation in the Judeo-Christian sense of the cosmos coming into being from nothing at a definite point in time. The Greeks understood the cosmos in terms of cyclical recurrence. Drawing an analogy from the obvious cyclical patterns in the physical world, for example, the cycle of human life involving birth, growth, decay, and death, or the succession of seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter, the Greeks reasoned that human events followed a cyclical, repetitive pattern. So why then did the Greeks study history? According to Ernst Breisach, history for the Greeks involved, quote, the study of human experience through the analysis of the past, end quote. Such study would review the repetitive patterns that characterize human nature and thus would yield understanding of humanity. Given the fact that Greek self-understanding was rooted in the polis, the city-state, the focus of historical study for the Greeks was political life, at the center of which was the experience of war. Why this preoccupation with war? What was it about war that revealed the true nature of political life? The Greeks believed that war, while tragic, revealed the social and political nature of human existence in all its aspects. According to Breisach, war was, quote, an essential force in the shaping of Greek destiny, and revealed the essential and unalterable patterns which structure human events. To better understand this Greek preoccupation with war, we will look at two exemplary Greek historians, both of whom lived in the 5th century before Christ, Herodotus and Thucydides. Almost nothing is known of Herodotus' life except for the approximate period in which he lived, in the 5th century BC and Halicarnassus, a Greek city within the Persian Empire. The Roman orator Cicero, many years later, referred to Herodotus as the father of history, by which he meant originator of historiography. Herodotus deserves this epithet because he was the first storyteller to depart from the Homeric tradition of relating past events through myth and legend. Herodotus systematically collected documentary evidence from various Mediterranean and Near East cultures in an attempt to explain why the wars between the Greek city-states and the Persian Empire erupted. Herodotus understood history in overtly political terms. In his view, the wars with Persia revealed the perennial conflict between freedom and slavery, democracy and despotism. At the same time, being a good cultural historian, Herodotus acknowledged the virtues of the Persians and the strife besetting the various Greek city-states. Now, the Peloponnesian War ended in the defeat and humiliation of Athens. Thucydides sought to understand the forces that led to this defeat. In the words of Breisach, Thucydides sought, quote, to lay bare the forces, stresses, decisions, strategies, policies, and passions involved in war, end quote. In his inquiry, Thucydides discovered the root cause of Athens' defeat: the obsession with power, the desire of the Athenians to dominate their neighboring city-states. This is what led to the humiliation of Athens, not the displeasure of the gods, but a natural human proclivity to power. Thus, for Thucydides, history revealed constant factors in human nature. We turn now to the Romans. The Roman historians shared the Greek preoccupation with politics. In the case of the Romans, of course, the focus was on the fortunes of the Roman Commonwealth. This was because they viewed the Roman Commonwealth as the apogee of all that was good and humane, that is, genuinely human, in the world. For the Romans, to live an authentically and fully human life was to live as a member of the Roman Commonwealth. All that was non-Roman was barbarian, that is, beneath human dignity and nobility. We will look at three representatives of this tradition: Polybius, Livy, and Tacitus. According to Polybius, Roman political institutions were a healthy amalgam of various political systems which gave the Roman state a certain stability not found among the Greeks. In Greek history, he observed a succession of constitutional forms, each of which was unstable by itself and which inevitably led to revolution and the establishment of a new form. First, there was monarchy, a single ruler who was accepted by the people and lives like his subjects. This was followed by tyranny, when a monarchy becomes corrupt after the king views himself as superior to his subjects. He indulges his passions at the expense of the common good. Tyranny is then replaced by aristocracy. This happens when those with lesser power revolt and establish themselves as a ruling cadre. The people accept them out of gratitude for delivering them from tyranny. Aristocracy is eventually replaced by oligarchy. When this happens when the aristocracy becomes corrupt and they exploit the people. The people then react against the oligarchy and elect leaders who genuinely have the public interest at heart, and the result of this is democracy. However, even democracy is short-lived, according to Polybius. The people become corrupt and thus vulnerable to demagoguery, and they degenerate into mob rule. Finally, there's despotism. A powerful demagogue emerges to reestablish order in the midst of mob rule. The Romans, by combining various aspects of these systems, argues Polybius, were able to resist the cycle of birth, rise, apogee, decay, and death that characterized the Greek city-states. In addition, Polybius attributed Rome's success to what he recognized as distinctly Roman virtues: statesmanship, perseverance, and steadiness of purpose, according to Brysock. As these virtues became diluted, so did Rome's security. Thus, Polybius predicted that Rome too would ultimately succumb to the cycle that doomed the Greeks, due to the corrupting influences of power and prosperity. Thus, for Polybius, history serves a moral purpose. It teaches those virtues necessary for political survival, if only those virtues can be preserved among the people and their leaders. Next we come to Livy. His Ab Urbe Condita, literally from the foundation, is a history of Rome from its mythical foundation to Livy's own time, the reign of Caesar Augustus. Livy's work discusses the transition of Rome from a republic to an autocratic empire. Livy maintains that in Old Rome, the Roman Republic, the people were characterized by civic virtues: courage, self-restraint, discipline, respect for law, and most importantly, pietas, devotion. This particular virtue was probably the most highly valued by the Romans. Pietas, from which we derive our word piety, connoted devotion to the Roman Republic, to the gods, to one's benefactors, to one's family, and to one's friends. In other words, pietas was the virtue whereby one is devoted to the things that truly matter, those things which make for happiness and stability. When Rome expanded into an empire, according to Livy, and acquired wealth and power, These virtues were eroded among the citizenry. The people gradually gave way to luxury, greed, indulgence, and softness. Thus Rome's republican institutions withered. Finally, for the Romans, we come to Tacitus. Tacitus lived and wrote in the early Christian era, and related the history of Rome from AD 69 to the death of Emperor Domitian in the year 96. One of the recurrent themes in Roman historiography is decadence, the gradual moral corruption of the Roman body politic. Tacitus observed this tendency in his Histories, which cover the first century of the Roman Empire. When Rome was a republic ruled by the Senate, the people enjoyed liberty and social harmony. However, along with the emergence of the autocratic regime under Caesar Augustus, public morality and civic spirit deteriorated. Tacitus believed that Rome's military and economic success had eroded the public virtues necessary to preserve liberty. In the words of Ernst Breisach, rampant luxury, greed, and ambition corrupted leaders and transformed citizens into subjects who could bear neither full servitude nor freedom. Now we come to the Christian view of history, which is derived from the Old Testament. Contrary to the Greek view, as a cycle of birth, maturity, decay, and death, the Christian view of history posits the existence of an omnipotent creator God who called the cosmos into existence at a specific point in time. More accurately, the original creation of the universe constituted the beginning of time itself. In addition, this creator God created human beings in his image and willed to have a personal relationship with them. In and through this divine human relationship, God would bring the cosmos to its perfection at a consummate point in history, the end of time. Thus, Christianity views history in terms of an unrepeatable, linear configuration with a definite beginning and a definite end. So history is the story of the working out of the relationship between God and human beings. Yet human beings ruptured this relationship through disobedience, resulting in estrangement from God and from his plan for them. God then intervened in human history by calling a specific people, the Jews, and entering into a special covenant with them in order to eventually restore his relationship with human beings. This covenant relationship has been fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus Christ, in whom God became man and through whom God restored the broken divine-human relationship. The Church, founded by Jesus Christ, is the institutional and communal locus or place where this restoration and healing of the divine-human relationship is effected in the course of history. Thus, history is the story of the mysterious unfolding of this plan of restoration between God and human beings. We will now consider four thinkers who most fully represent the Christian view of history: Eusebius of Caesarea, Augustine of Hippo, Gregory of Tours, and finally the early medieval English historian Bede. Many consider Eusebius of Caesarea to be the first Christian historian. His work, Ecclesiastical History, chronicles the history of the Church from apostolic times to the age of Constantine. Next we come to Augustine of Hippo. Augustine is arguably the most influential theologian in the history of the Church. He authored numerous works on almost every theological subject, numerous scriptural commentaries, and sermons. His main contribution to the Christian view of history is his City of God. Written in the wake of the sack of Rome by the Visigoths in the year 410, City of God is a response to pagan assertions that Rome had collapsed because of Christianity. When compared to Eusebius, Augustine has a decidedly less triumphalistic view of church history. At the same time, for Augustine, Rome's fall was not inevitable. Had the Romans persevered in virtue, their commonwealth would have survived. A commonwealth is defined as the weal of the people, a definition derived from Cicero. In essence, it is the people united in the pursuit of justice. When Rome abandoned justice, it ceased to be a true commonwealth, argues Augustine. In fact, Augustine believes that Christianity could have saved Rome from her fate. Augustine writes, "If the kings of the earth and all their subjects, if all princes and judges of the earth, if young men and maidens, old and young, every age and both sexes, if they whom the Baptist addressed, the publicans and the soldiers, were all together to hearken to and observe the precepts of the Christian religion regarding a just and virtuous life, then should the republic adorn the whole earth with its own felicity, and attain in life everlasting to the pinnacle of kingly glory. But because this man listens and that man scoffs, and most are enamored of the blandishments of vice rather than the wholesome severity of virtue, the people of Christ, whatever be their condition, whether they be kings, princes, judges, soldiers, or provincials, rich or poor, bond or free, male or female, are enjoined to endure this earthly republic, wicked and dissolute as it is, so that they may by this endurance win for themselves an eminent place in that most holy and august assembly of angels and the republic of heaven, in which the will of God is the law." Moreover, Augustine provides a more thoroughgoing theology of history in the City of God. He understands history as the story of two metaphorical cities, the city of earth and the city of God. The city of earth signifies the mass of sinful humanity throughout time, motivated by love of self to the point of contempt for God. The city of God, on the other hand, designates the elect in every age, motivated by love of God to the point of contempt for self. The two cities coexist in history, and thus history is a story of two contradictory loves. The two cities, however, will be separated at the end of time. In addition to the City of God, in his comparatively brief work on Catechizing the Uninstructed, Augustine provides what will become the paradigm for understanding history in the Middle Ages, the schema of the 6 ages of the world. According to this schema, history is divided into 6 ages corresponding to the 6 days of creation. Age 1 begins with the creation of Adam and extends to the time of Noah. Age 2 begins with Noah and ends with the call of Abraham. Age 3 begins with the life of Abraham and it ends with the kingdom of David. Age 4 goes from the time of David to the Babylonian captivity of Israel. Age 5 begins with Israel's return from Babylon and ends with the incarnation. Age 6 commences with the incarnation and goes on until the end of the world. Of the 6th age, Augustine writes, "With his coming, the 6th age has entered on its process, so that now the spiritual grace, which in previous times was known to a few patriarchs and prophets, may be made manifest to all nations, to the intent that no man should worship God but freely, fondly desiring of him not the visible rewards of his services and the happiness of this present life, but the eternal life alone, in which he is to enjoy God himself, in order that in the 6th age the mind of man may be renewed after the image of God, even as on the 6th day man was made after the image of God." Next we come to Gregory of Tours. Gregory was a Frankish historian and bishop of Tours from 573 to 594. He came from an ecclesiastically well-connected family, several of his uncles on both his mother's and father's side being bishops. Several of his historical and hagiographical works have survived. 2 we will examine briefly. The first is his most widely known work, his Historiae, the Histories, usually referred to as the History of the Franks. This work consists of 10 books relating the history of the Frankish kings. An interesting feature of the Histories is the fact that it begins with the creation of the world and ends in the year 591, 3 years before Gregory's death. Gregory places the history of his own people, and by extension his own contemporary situation, within the context of world history and salvation history. The events he narrates are thus interpreted in these larger cosmic terms. A good example of Gregory's interpretation of events is his telling of the story of King Clovis I. Clovis, who lived from 466 to 511, was a pagan ruler who converted to Catholic Christianity at the behest of his Catholic wife, Clotilde. He then made Catholicism the faith of his kingdom. In this, the Franks were unique among the Germanic barbarian nations in that they did not first convert to Arian Christianity, then to Catholicism. They converted directly from paganism to Catholicism. As the Catholic Church had recurring conflicts with their Arian rulers in Italy and elsewhere, the newly Catholic Franks became powerful allies and protectors of the Church. Gregory relates the conversion of Clovis in terms reminiscent of the conversion of the Emperor Constantine the Great. Clovis was engaged in a desperate war with the Alemanni barbarians. Still a hardened pagan, he was convinced by Queen Clotilde to appeal to the God of the Christians for assistance. Gregory writes, "When the two armies met on the battlefield, there was a great slaughter, and the troops of Clovis were rapidly being annihilated. He raised his eyes to heaven when he saw this, felt compunction in his heart, and was moved to tears. 'Jesus Christ,' he said, 'you who Clotilde maintains to be the Son of the living God, you who deign to give help to those who in travail and victory to those who trust in you. In faith I beg the glory of your help. If you will give me victory over my enemies, and if I may have evidence of that miraculous power which the people dedicated to your name say that they have experienced, then I will believe in you and I will be baptized in your name.' Clovis's army prevails, and in honor of his pledge, Clovis is then baptized. When Gregory describes the event, he explicitly links Clovis to Constantine. He writes, 'Like some new Constantine, he stepped forward to the baptismal pool, ready to wash away the sores of the old leprosy and to be cleansed in flowing water from the sordid stains which he had borne so long.'" The second work of Gregory's we will examine is his Liber Vitae Patrum, the Book of the Life of the Fathers. This work narrates the lives of various saints in late Roman, early Frankish Gaul, most of whom were bishops of various important churches throughout the region. Now you might ask, how can hagiography, a genre that deals with the lives and miracles of the saints, be considered historiography, the writing of history? Does not the writing of true history require that we focus solely on events that are part of regular human experience? For a modern historian, this would indeed be the case. But for ancient and medieval Christians, miracles were the stuff of ordinary experience. And one of the purposes of writing history for ancient pagans as well as medieval Christians was to provide moral instruction. Thus, a saint's life would qualify as history. Now, the form of the title of Gregory's Life of the Fathers is very significant. Some editions erroneously refer to it as the Lives of the Fathers, since it contains numerous brief narratives of the lives of various saints. However, the form used by Gregory is vitae, which is the genitive form of the singular vita. Thus, it is properly translated Book of the Life, singular, of the Fathers. Why does Gregory use the singular life when the book contains many different lives? He tells us in the introduction. He writes, "Some people have asked whether we should say the vita, life, or vitae, lives of the saints. The writer Pliny in the third book of the Art of Grammar says, the ancients have said the lives of each of us, but grammarians did not believe that the word vita has a plural, from which it is clear that it is better to speak of the life of the fathers rather than the lives of the fathers. The more so, since there is a diversity of merits and virtues among them, but the one life of the body sustains them all in this world." Thus, for Gregory, the lives of the various saints manifest the one life of the body of Christ, of which they are the individual members. Next we come to Bede. Posterity refers to Bede as the Venerable, and as the father of English history. Both appellations, I believe, are well deserved. Bede was a prolific scholar, a devout Benedictine monk, and a devoted teacher. While most of his works consist of biblical commentaries, he is most remembered for his ecclesiastical history of the English nation. This work, which Bede completed only a few years before his death, relates the story of Christianity in England from Roman times to Bede's own day. Bede's ecclesiastical history focuses on two things: the missionary efforts of Pope Gregory in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons, and the triumph of Roman liturgical traditions over Celtic practices, particularly in regard to the dating of Easter. Bede refers to Pope Gregory the Great as the Apostle to the English, in much the same way that Patrick is the Apostle to the Irish and Boniface the Apostle to the Germans. Gregory played an indispensable role in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons. Bede relates that although Gregory himself desired to lead a mission to the English, he was constrained by the people of Rome to remain in Rome, and so, after he became pope, sent missionaries to the English. Bede writes, "Then repairing to the bishop of the Roman Apostolical See, for he was not himself then made pope, he entreated him to send some ministers of the word into Britain to the nation of the English, by whom it might be converted to Christ. Declaring himself ready to undertake that work by the assistance of God if the apostolic pope should think fit to have it done so. Which not being then able to perform, because though the pope was willing to grant his request, yet the citizens of Rome could not be brought to consent that so noble, so renowned, and so learned a man should depart the city. As soon as he was himself made pope, he perfected the long-desired work, sending other preachers, but himself by his prayers and exhortations assisting the preaching, that it might be successful. This account, as we have received it from the ancients, we have thought fit to insert into our ecclesiastical history." The triumph of Roman over Celtic traditions in regard to the dating of Easter culminated in the Synod of Whitby in 664. Now this was a rather complex disagreement. In the very early church, Easter had been celebrated on the same time as the Jewish Passover, on the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan. This meant that Easter Day could be celebrated on any day of the week. Very early, however, the tradition of celebrating Easter on a Sunday became the preferred practice, since Sunday was the day of the Lord's resurrection. Celebrating Easter on Sunday also signified a departure from the old dispensation maintained by the Jews. Then the question became, on which Sunday should Easter be celebrated? The various customs for dating Easter are very complex, and I will not go into them here. Suffice it to say that the custom used by the Roman Church came into conflict with the Celtic custom. Why did this even matter? For Bede, it was a matter of the visible unity and Catholicity of the Church. One of the goals of his ecclesiastical history is to more firmly root the Anglo-Saxon Church in the Church Universal. King Oswy of Northumbria, which was the northernmost Anglo-Saxon kingdom in Britain and, incidentally, was Bede's own homeland, convened a synod in the convent of Whitby, to where representatives of both traditions were summoned to make their case. In the end, King Oswy decided in favor of the Roman customs on the basis of Rome being the see of St. Peter, who holds the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Bede also was an accomplished hagiographer. His ecclesiastical history relates the lives of various saints and the role they played in evangelizing the Anglo-Saxons. One saint to whom Bede devoted a separate work was St. Cuthbert. Now Cuthbert lived about 50 years before Bede. He was a monk at the monastery of Lindisfarne, which was a center of Celtic monastic and liturgical practice. He later became bishop of the region. In his Vita Cuthberti, his Life of Cuthbert, Bede relates the life, miracles, and missionary activity of Cuthbert, presenting him as one who evangelizes the rural population of Northumbria and solidifies the connection between the Northumbrian church and the church in Rome. Bede's Life of Cuthbert is an excellent example of the non-distinction in the medieval mind between hagiography and historiography. In the prologue, Bede writes, "I have written nothing about the saint without first subjecting the facts to the most thorough scrutiny, and have passed on nothing to be transcribed for general reading that has not been obtained by rigorous examination of trustworthy witnesses." Thus, the mere fact that Bede was writing about a pious subject, the life of a saint, did not mean that he was suspending his critical faculties. In fact, it could be argued that given the importance of his subject, Bede was being even more conscientious and critical than he would have been had he been writing about something mundane. In addition, we see in Bede the conviction that history writing serves the pedagogical end of moral, or in this case, spiritual instruction. He writes, "When in reading my book your hearts are raised to a more burning desire for the kingdom of heaven, by the memory of our Holy Father, Cuthbert, do not forget to intercede with the divine mercy on behalf of one so small, so that I may be found worthy on earth to long for and hereafter in perfect bliss to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." As we leave the Middle Ages, we now come to the modern era, and we will examine several modern views of history, represented by 6 key thinkers: Leonardo Bruni, Edward Gibbon, the Marquis de Condorcet, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Leopold von Ranke, and finally, Karl Marx. Leonardo Bruni's most important work, his History of the Florentine People, is a history of the city of Florence and its rise to power in Italy during the 14th century. Bruni ascribes the rise of Florence to a republican form of government, which fostered certain civic virtues such as courage, strength, and industriousness. In this, he is very much in the same tradition as the Roman historians. Likewise, like the Romans, Bruni predicted the eventual decline of Florence once these virtues were abandoned. Bruni is also credited with being the first to divide history into 3 periods: Antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Modern Era. Like most humanists of his day, Bruni regarded the Middle Ages, the period in between the much revered Antiquity and his own modern era, as a period of darkness and ignorance. His historiography sought to demonstrate the recovery of the values and virtues of antiquity in the life of his own people. His return to political history and his division of history into 3 periods have earned Bruni the distinction as the first modern historian. Now we come to Edward Gibbon, an 18th century English historian. Gibbon was educated at Oxford University, showing promise as a student until his unexpected conversion to Catholicism at age 16. His horrified father sent him to Calvinist Switzerland, where Gibbon reverted to Protestantism, but by this time had become more of a skeptic in matters religious. His historical masterpiece, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, is, as the title indicates, the history of the later Roman Empire and the rise of Christianity. Gibbon proved no friend of the Christian faith. He considered Christianity to be one of the major factors in Rome's demise, and considered the triumph of the church under Constantine, quote, "the triumph of barbarism and religion," end quote. Gibbon identified several causes for the rise of Christianity in late antiquity. One of these was the inflexible zeal of Christians, which made them very aggressive in proselytizing. Another was the Christian claim to miracles and divine intervention on their behalf, which further enhanced their fanaticism. A third cause of the rise of Christianity was the austere morals of the Christians, which exalted the virtues of humility and meekness, which in turn were antithetical to the more robust militaristic virtues upon which Rome was based. As Christian morals became more and more pervasive, Roman military virtue eroded, thus making the empire vulnerable to invasion. And that is how Christianity, according to Gibbon, caused Rome's demise. Next we come to Marie-Jean-Antoine Nicolas de Caratat, the Marquis de Condorcet. His work, Sketch for a Historical Picture of the Progress of the Human Mind, inaugurated the progressive view of history, the belief that humankind was on an inevitable march toward greater understanding, tolerance, and freedom. Like virtually all thinkers from the Enlightenment, Condorcet believed the medieval period of history to be a particularly dark and dismal time, ridden with error and intolerance. He writes, "Man's only achievements were theological daydreaming and superstitious imposture. His only morality, religious intolerance. In blood and tears, crushed between priestly tyranny and military despotism, Europe awaited the moment when a new enlightenment would allow her to be reborn free, heiress to humanity and virtue." Condorcet believed he had discovered the one thing necessary to free humankind from error. He writes, "Having long been engaged in pondering the means of improving man's fate, I have not been able to avoid the conclusion that there is actually only one such means, the speeding of the progress of enlightenment." Now, with this faith in enlightenment, Condorcet formulated a view of history in which humankind would inevitably progress to an age of perfect rationality and freedom. Again, he writes, "How welcome to the philosopher is this picture of the human race, freed from all its chains, released from the dominion of chance and from that of the enemies of its progress, advancing with a firm and sure step in the path of truth, virtue, and happiness. How this spectacle consoles him for the errors, crimes, and injustices that still defile the earth, of which he is often the victim. It is in the contemplation of this picture that he finds the reward for his efforts on behalf of the progress of reason and the defense of liberty." Notice what this does to the study of history. History now serves a future-oriented purpose, to effect social and political change. The study of the past is valuable only in terms of its service towards this utopian goal. Ironically, Condorcet died while imprisoned by the Jacobins, the left-wing radicals who eventually came to power during the French Revolution. He thus became a victim of the very movement he so confidently espoused. As we move into the 19th century, we notice a shift in historical thinking. While the progressive view of history is by no means repudiated, it is transformed by the influence of philosophical idealism, a school of thought associated with Immanuel Kant. Idealism was largely a reaction against the rationalism and empiricism of the Enlightenment. It questioned the unexamined confidence Enlightenment thinkers had in their ability to know reality according to reason and observation. Idealism maintains that ideas that exist in the human mind form the basis of reality. The question then becomes, how do we account for the correlation between the ideas in our mind and the external world? Kant maintained that there really was no necessary connection between the two. Our knowledge of reality is wholly mediated through the ideas or categories of the mind. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a student of Kant's, found this unsatisfactory. He wanted to be able to account for the apparent correlation between mind and external reality. How is it that the ideas of the mind and the external phenomena which they make sense out of come to be in relation to one another? Pursuant to these questions, he developed a comprehensive system or worldview rooted in idealism. At the heart of Hegel's system was the absolute. This is pure spirit or mind, which operates in and through the collective mind of humanity. This absolute mind, operating in and through human beings in response to their environment, is in a state of flux and development. It develops in terms of paired oppositions. For example, mind and matter, infinite and finite, freedom and non-freedom, internal and external. Through the agency of human minds, the absolute mind seeks to resolve these contradictions through an ultimate synthesis, which represents the development of the absolute on a higher, more advanced level. This dynamic, aptly described, though not by Hegel himself, as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, expresses the unfolding of reality in the natural order, studied by scientists, in philosophy, in religion, and in politics. In political life, Hegel saw the dynamic as the gradual emergence, unfolding, and establishment of human freedom. This freedom was embodied for Hegel in the modern nation-state. The state was the perfect synthesis of the freedom of the individual and the stability of the nation. His philosophy of history placed the emergence of the nation-state at the center of the historical process. This nation-state represented the full realization in time of the absolute in a perfect synthesis of freedom and order. History is thus the story of the process of the realization of freedom. This was Hegel's philosophy of history. Now we turn to Leopold von Ranke. While Hegel was almost exclusively a philosopher, Ranke was a bona fide historian whose approach to history was very much influenced by Hegel. Ranke was born to a devout Lutheran family, his father being a pastor. He was a student at the University of Leipzig, where he studied theology and classics, concentrating on the exposition of texts in terms of their philological and historical contexts. Thus, at the very beginning of his academic career, he had a predilection for historical study. This predilection combined with his religious devotion, and consequently his goal became to comprehend God's actions through the medium of human actions in history. In keeping with Hegel's philosophy of history, Ranke concentrated on the history of nation-states. He studied them as entities expressing the organic development of particular cultures. He wrote a wealth and variety of such histories. These included History of the Latin and Teutonic Nations from 1494 to 1514, History of the Reformation in Germany, Memoirs of the House of Brandenburg and History of Prussia during the 17th and 18th centuries, Civil Wars and Monarchy in France in the 16th and 17th centuries, and a History of England principally in the 17th century. In each of these works, Ranke attempted to distill the cultural, social, political, and even spiritual ethos of each nation as it found expression during the period of national consolidation. There are two quotes of Ranke that, when properly understood, summarize his approach to history. The first is the oft-quoted phrase, "Every epoch is immediate to God." What did Ranke mean by this? It was simply another way of expressing his conviction that each historical epoch must be understood in its own terms, in terms of its own spirit or ethos. There is a divine presence, as it were, in all historical epochs and in the events that occur in those epochs. The function of the historian, one might say, is to approach each epoch with an almost religious reverence and not reduce its significance to such unhistorical ideas as progress or enlightenment. The second phrase is best expressed in the original German, wie es eigentlich gewesen. As historian David Bebbington has shown, this phrase has been widely mistranslated and hence misunderstood. Typically it is translated as what actually happened, suggesting that Ranke was taking a radically objectivist, purely observational approach to history. However, Bebbington says that a more apt translation would be what essentially happened. This rendering better captures the essence of Ranke's approach to history. Through intuition and empathy, the historian seeks to distill the essence of an historical epoch. Finally, we come to Karl Marx. Marx had been a student of Hegel's philosophy while studying law at the University of Berlin. He became involved in a group of students known as the Young Hegelians. The Young Hegelians were a politically radical group of thinkers who adopted the structures of Hegel's thought but employed them in materialist and even atheistic terms. For example, consider the question of labor-employer relations. For Hegel, the relationship between an employer and a laborer might reflect a specific idea in the mind of humankind at a given historical moment. For example, the idea of justice, that is, giving to each person his or her due. This idea produced in the Middle Ages the economic institution of feudalism. Labor was exchanged for subsistence and security. So justice in the Middle Ages meant obedience on the part of the serf and protection on the part of the feudal lord. Again, continuing with Hegel's thought, as the idea progressed throughout time, it transcended feudalism and came to manifest itself in a market-driven economy in which wages were paid to the laborer for a specific amount of work. Justice then came to mean an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. Marx turned this idea on its head. His response would be that the material relations between the serf and the feudal lord produced the idea of justice as service and protection that prevailed in the Middle Ages. As economic conditions changed, the relationship between labor and employer changed, resulting in the new definition of justice as labor for wages. But here is the dirty little secret for Marx. These material conditions always serve the interests of the ruling class. Justice for Marx is simply a conceptual cloaking of exploitation. To better understand the difference between Hegel and Marx, consider their respective anthropologies, their contrasting views of the human person. Since Hegel believed that ideas are the basis of reality, the human person is fundamentally a thinker, Homo sapiens, that is, thinking man. He constructs his life, relationships, and institutions according to thought. Marx, on the other hand, being a materialist, maintained that the human person is fundamentally a worker, Homo faber, that is, making man or creating man. Man creates or makes things. He creates the means of material subsistence, and his life, relationships, and institutions, to vastly varying degrees, are constructed according to this principle. So how then did Marx view history? What was his philosophy of history? Hegel viewed thought as the moving force in history. History for Hegel is the unfolding of the absolute in freedom as expressed in the nation-state. Marx, on the other hand, understood material subsistence to be the moving force in history. Thus, Marx viewed history as the gradual realization of the liberation of the proletariat, that is, the working class. Like Hegel, he viewed history in terms of paired oppositions, but these oppositions were not metaphysical, that is, spirit versus matter, infinite versus finite, but conflicting economic interests. The thesis, as it were, for Marx was the working class throughout history. The antithesis was the ruling classes that exploit the labor of the workers. And the ultimate synthesis would be the triumph of the proletariat in a classless socialist society. This triumph will be realized through violent revolution. In this lecture, we have encountered key thinkers in historiography in the Western tradition. We began with the Greek and Roman view of history, explored the Christian understanding, and ended with various modern approaches to history. There are 3 questions I would like you to ponder. First, is there anything of significance that all the views have in common? If so, what is it? Second, what makes the Christian view of history unique? And third, it has been said that Marxism is a Christian heresy. After comparing the Christian and Marxist views of history, how might this statement be true?